95% of agentic projects fail. But the reason for that failure is likely 99% of engineers, programmers, developers, project managers don't know how to actually build agentic system.
I think this is something that a lot of developers currently don't notice about AI. Like, it will implement the task as you told it to, but it's still lacking the, hey, let's stop for a second. We need to refactor the code because I find this common layer or whatever.
Interactivity is the differentiator factor. Like when you're using an IDE with an extension like a cursor, you're always checking what happens and you're just doing this interactively. UI elements like simplifies and accelerates the onboarding for you as a developer. It doesn't replace you as a developer. It's just like here on the side exists to help you with achieving like specific tasks, like executing, helping you to write a specific code file or specific unit tests and so on, and be very helpful in the sense that there is a UI. You don't need to know any commands because there are buttons and it's just like a box for you to type the text and execute. So I think like the cool part of the cursor or windsurf is that they are giving you this IDE with lots of UI elements to help you onboard to using these tools more like proactively and in your everyday use case. While for AI agents, like with terminal, by definition, like you don't need like buttons, right? Like complex things can be done just with a combination of the keys or the commands. So terminal is like for more advanced users, for those who are ready to accelerate even further, because they don't need to have a visualization. They are okay just like living in the terminal and manipulating all the commands in the terminal. Because if you're at some point advanced the Vim or Nana or whatever editor or a Git, you actually don't need UIs, right? You can just do and achieve very hard scenarios with the terminal directly, and it saves you time. But again, like it's just like a bit harder because it's less interactive, because it's easier to lose what happens. And I think the amount of the generated information sometimes may be overwhelming. So it's hard to navigate for the terminal just because there's so many things are happening and it requires some skill to learn how to use it properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think things like cursor, for example, where you see the changes and you can flick from file to file very, very easily. You obviously miss that from the terminal point of view. But I don't know what it is about, just being a terminal that actually just makes me feel faster, more productive at the terminal.
Right. Yeah.
And of course, when you're at the terminal, you get the power of the terminal, right? Tell us a little bit about how you can effectively use the terminal beyond just Claude Code.
When you build an app in Base 44 these days, like there's a lot of infrastructure and setup that happens before the LLMs even writes code that in some ways limits it, but not really, not in terms of like what it needs to, but it's kind of like it those are guardrails that the LLM should keep. And as long as it keeps that, then it should be fine to some degree. So again, we automatically create the entire read, update, delete, kind of like the CRUD SDK, and we make it like really good, and we implement like rate limits on top of that and things like that LLMs wouldn't really care about. And when you leverage APIs and integrations and so on, like we keep a very strict schema. There's like a lot of things that we implemented built into the application so that the LLM won't kind of like be this reward seeking of like, I'll do whatever, but I'll keep your app exposed and so on. The other thing is, yes, at some point, we automatically feedback the LLM, whether the user knows about it or not, that it needs to refactor something. So for example, one of the things that makes LLM confused the most, and people feel that it like across the vibe coding categories, when they're saying like, hey, I asked it to do something, it didn't do it, it did the opposite, it deleted a feature or whatever, is when code files are getting too long.
Right.
right? If like you've implemented, so you ask it initially or early on, hey, implement this page, create a to-do list app, and it did something simple. It's like a very simple to-do list app like in any other React.
Right.
And then start layering in features, right? So the LLM does what you asked it to, and it started adding like AI features to write the task description, and then user management to like assign different teams and boards and whatever. And at some point you have like, if you're not careful, you might have like this very large code file. And so one of the things is like we're running behind the scenes refactoring tests to maybe tell the LLM, hey, like you passed the threshold, you should now refactor this file. Even if like, okay, the user asks you something, first refactor the file, then implement what the user has asked you to. And I think like there's a lot more to do there. But yeah, it's somewhat of like this code quality agent that's keep nudging the LLM at some points if it finds that it's past the threshold of like, hey, like there's this code here and this code here, like do something, refactor that.
Look at the state of Agentic today. What would you say are kind of the things that are creating that ceiling for Agentic today? What are the biggest things that are causing Agentic development to fail, or at least to cause problems to developers trying to use Agentic development today?
The limiting factors of the space right now. And there was an interesting report from MIT a couple weeks ago, I think it was, that basically said 95% of agentic projects fail. And it was a fairly sort of sensational title. And when you dig into that a little bit, there's two ways to think about those types of sort of stats. One, 95% of projects fail, which is probably true. But the reason for that failure is likely 99% of engineers, programmers, developers, project managers don't know how to actually build agentic systems. And it's a byproduct of a new emerging space. And it's so the limiting factor is the fact that it's really hard to look beyond this sort of I'm going to call it AI washing, the agentic washing of products, and the people associated with it to determine what the capabilities of the products and the people implementing these products really are. So when you see this sort of high failure rate, it speaks to the fact that we're in a new emerging space. And when you go, if you're old enough to have been around at the beginning of the internet, you would have seen the same thing with a lot of the internet projects that corporations took on back in the late 90s. And there was this sort of, this idea that the internet wasn't quite going to cut it for most business type applications. And then they were wrong. It was the fact that we didn't, as a industry, understand exactly how to build user-friendly internet-based applications. And over time, there were models to follow. Amazons and the eBays and whatnot showed up, and we're like, okay, this is how you create a web-based service that people can easily interact with, and it's not just recreating software. Same problem 25 years later, 30 years later in the agentics and AI space. There's a tendency for people to build applications the way they've always built them, with human-centric models, review cycles, long drawn-out sprints, and different sort of traditional tactics that were optimized for a world where we built slowly over time and gradually. Now we're in a world where we can literally copy anything anywhere at a moment's notice. And the ability, the quality of the code, although important, is less important than the momentum that you get in terms of speed and time to market. So when you're looking at companies that are embracing this, they're embracing this in a way that doesn't just replace their developers. That might be a byproduct, but it augments them in ways that those developers were never able to do before. So you're empowering them with sort of a kind of superpower to create much more effectively and much more quickly, which in itself creates a whole variety of secondary problems. But ultimately, this is the empowerment of developers to do more with less.